Hello and welcome to today's Mighty Mini Monday. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about running a local Kubernetes cluster. So there are actually quite a few options out there, and I want to just tell you about a few of them so that if you're looking at running a local cluster, you can go ahead and take this advice and run with it.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The No Channel.
So let's start out with the three main ones that I know of and want to talk about. The first one is probably the most popular by far, and probably its biggest pro is that it is most supported, is Minikube. So Minikube has been around for like 3 or 4 years. It's been a while, and it basically runs a single node cluster in a VM. Although they have some options for other stuff. Well, we can talk about that later. The second one is a new and upstart. It's also a Kubernetes SIG, is called Kind, and it's Kubernetes in Docker. The biggest pro this has is it's very fast. And then the last, which I think a lot of people think more of as edge Kubernetes, but really can be a local distro, is K3s. It's something made by Rancher. So those are the major players in local Kubernetes clusters. Now, why would you want to have a local Kubernetes cluster? I think a lot of the main reasons is that if you deploy something to a cluster, a lot of times everything, your app, especially if it's a microservice app, is made to work with everything else in the cluster. And a lot of times depends on those things being there and running there and doing that. So if you're deploying stuff to run in a cluster, sometimes you need to deploy it in a local cluster to have a full test. Or one of the things that I think, and this is where K3s I think really shines, is CI pipelines. Because again, to test the full experience, to do integration tests, you will need to run it in a cluster, because that's where in production it's going to run. If you don't, you're going to run into bugs when it gets to production if you're not replicating that. All right, so let's kind of take these head to head. If you're wanting fastest startup time, you want to go with Kind. Kind is very simple. All it requires is Docker. And as long as you have Docker, that's all you need. Let's go ahead and start this up. So to install Kind, all you'll need to do is you're just going to go to the releases page and download the one you want for us. For us, we want the Linux AMD 64. So we'll just wget release, and we should now have a Kind Linux AMD 64. We're going to rename this. So we need to plus X, we need to give it execute rights. And then we're going to move it to just as Kind. And now we'll be able to execute it. And as you can see, we now have a Kind command here. You can put this in your path, very easy to get. And this is how it's run. And now you can do Kind create cluster. You can give it a name. We don't need to. We'll give it a default name of Kind. It's not in our path, so we have to run it like this. So I'm not in the Docker group on this machine. And now it is creating a cluster, and you can see how fast it will run. So the longest part of installing with Kind is actually pulling the images, which is going to happen with any of them. So the Kubernetes images that get pulled down. As soon as those are pulled down, it will be a very fast process for Kind, because it is just starting those images in Docker. And I'm going to show you some cool things with it. So the very first thing that's really interesting is everything's just running in your local Docker. And that also means that you can interact with it with Docker really easily, because it's just right there. So if you see here now, if we do sudo docker ps, you can see our single control plane node is actually running in Docker, and it's notice here we could start it, stop it from here, and this is really awesome. It does come with a few of its own drawbacks because it now means that you have Docker in Docker. So this node is running Docker in itself, and it's kind of some interesting things that have to be done to make that work. It also means that if you want a cluster that runs cryo or something other than Docker, you can't. So this is probably what I would consider its biggest limitation, is the fact that it's pretty limited to Docker. I think that there's work being done for containerd, but then it will be kind of locked down to containerd, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. And then you can't test some of those other things. So if you want, some other container technologies, whether it's VMs in containers or whatnot, those won't work here. So if you're leveraging those, kind of out for you. Sorry for the pun. So let's move on. But at this point, you can use this, and you're going to be able to use kubectl just like you would normally. And wait. So it's a very big pain because I had to use sudo. Generally, you want to put yourself in the Docker group so that you don't have to use sudo when running the kind command, and then you won't have to use sudo throughout any of this because you have access to Docker. Unfortunately, I have to put sudo in all of these because I wasn't in the Docker. That is incorrect, and you really shouldn't do it that way. So make sure that you're part of the Docker group and are added to that so that you don't run into the same problem. But as you can see, you can also use kubectl just like you normally would. So this is a kind cluster. It's very easy. And now it starts up and shuts down very quickly. So let's do kind delete cluster. Again, it's not in my path. So now it is deleted. That is how fast. Now let's create the cluster again. Notice we didn't have to pull that image again, and so it went through much faster. And observe how fast this is getting. Now, you can edit the kind configuration and create a whole bunch of different node and configurations, multi-master or multi-worker or whatnot if you want. So that is possible. That's outside the purview of this. Let's move on to Minikube and discuss some of its strengths and weaknesses. I think the biggest weakness is that it's the longest to get set up. And if you have some people that are unfamiliar with VM technologies and whatnot, Minikube is going to need a back end it's going to need a VM engine to power its back end. So that's something to think about when you're doing this. If it's not that hard to do, and generally it's taken care of for you, but you'll need to install KVM on Linux at least before you do it. All right, so for Minikube, you can install it. You can check if you have a package manager that has it available. If you don't, you can install it through just a simple curl command again. Here, this one also did the chmodding, so it has execute permissions. And we can do Minikube start, although this will require sudo most likely. Or maybe not. So as you can see, it is using the KVM2 driver because I already installed KVM. So if you need help, we can make another video. Leave me a comment below that you'd like a video on KVM and setting it up. I'm actually probably going to do a Mighty Mini Monday on making bridge networks in KVM because for some reason that's harder than it should be. So biggest con of Minikube that I know of is it's kind of slow and it's kind of heavy. So it sets up a fully fledged VM in your cluster, and that can kind of be a little painful. That being said, if you're somebody that's really wanting to leverage the full power of Kubernetes, you need different sets of storage. You need different sets of whatnot, and want to have full control over all of your images and have a real cluster. Then this is for you. It's going to give you the most power, but it's the heaviest weight. So that's really both the plus and the minus for Minikube. Is it's the most powerful. It gives you the most control, the most access. It also is the heaviest weight. It's going to be more stressful if you can't hear my computer's fan really powered up to try to run this. And it's taking quite a bit longer to set up because it actually sets up a cluster. It actually uses kubeadm on the install. Whereas Kind has an image that already has it all installed and everything. This is making a base image and installing Kubernetes. Now, I think that that's pretty cool because there are some things that you can do on this with like the startup process and whatnot for developing, whether you're working on an installer or whatnot. So that is a very awesome part of Minikube. So it's a little bit more fully featured, but it is also a little bit heavier. It will allow you to use different things like cryo or RTK containers. So if that's important to you, it has that flexibility. All right, now we have one. You can do Minikube. Well, it's not our path, so Minikube status. And it will give you the status. And there you have it. All right, so our very last one is K3s by Rancher. So K3s is interesting, and I really like it because it does maintain full support for the Kubernetes API while ripping out legacy stuff, as well as it makes a very lightweight container runtime because it removes things like etcd, so it runs with an SQLite backend. And what I actually think it's best for, if I had to say, would be CI pipelines. I know that a lot of people talk about it with edge compute, but I actually think that CI pipelines is probably by far its best feature. And the only reason that is because it lets you watch a folder and it will pick up changes from it and run those. And so I think it's really powerful for setting up CI pipelines and being able to process that type of stuff through a pipeline like that. And I think it's really underestimated for that. Something where high availability might not, really be that required. So I really think that K3s's big thing is CI pipelines. Now, as far as using it, I don't personally like using it locally as much as I do Kind or Minikube. And it would fall under the same reasons I don't like micro KAS. So if you noticed, I left that out completely. I really don't like micro KAS. And the reason is it's kind of like this fake thing that you can't really access. And for me, it's all about accessing Kubernetes. Micro KS allows you to create a cluster. And then if all you want to do is install things on that cluster using micro KS, they would be fine. But the problem is I most of the time am fiddling with the cluster itself, and it gives me really no access to do so. K3s does give you access, and you can get a kubeconfig file, but they kind of hide it all away and make it kind of hard to. And I think that was a design choice, but for me, that's not really what I'm looking for. And that would be my biggest downfall. As far as installing it, it's very easy to install. We can go ahead and install it. Let me pull up its documentation. Let's stop our Minikube because it is going to be burning. We can actually look at, and you can see there is actually a VM running in KVM. But we kind of don't want it. So let's Minikube stop. And again, Minikube will let you have a lot of different clusters stood up. So I really think Minikube is probably the best one for corporations where they want to package this. The other thing that is Minikube will allow you to change out the image very easily and let you run your own image basically. So it allows for a lot of configuration, which is a little bit harder on Kind. All right, so that's stopped. Let's go ahead and install K3s. Oops. All right, we're gonna grab K3s, just pulling down a package, and then we're going to rename this to K3s. All right, so that was really weird. The first time I did maybe I did ARM 64 because I thought it was AMD 64. Okay, that was my bad. They have on their downloads page, they have K3s and K3s-ARM 64, and I thought that was AMD 64, but just the bare naked one is the correct ARM 64. So that was a little confusing. It's all right. So we're just going to copy and paste. There's things here. Command won't be found because it's not in our path. Very easy command line action there. And it's going to create a very lightweight Kubernetes. Now, where this doesn't work quite as well, and I kind of regret running on my laptop, is it's kind of will mess with your networking on your local box. So I don't actually recommend you run it on your local machine. You should run it in a KVM or in a Docker file. They actually have a Docker image that you can use and you can go and get and run. But then I think that it loses some of its shine when you're having to then run it inside of things. So this is why, for me, I don't like K3s for my local run. I use both Minikube and Kind. Kind is very fast, very easy to use, and is my go-to. And then when I need something a little more heavyweight, or actually when I'm looking to do things that require a little bit more Kubernetes native, I look towards Minikube. And I run my local. So when I'm doing stuff in Kubeflow, I run that in a Minikube locally, because that's the easiest way to get a very nice and clean install locally. And you can see that our Kind cluster is up and running. Now, this is where, again, some of the oddities of Kind. You notice we have to use K3s with the kubectl. Now, you can actually get the kubeconfig file, and I can go into how to get that and how to actually use this like a real Kubernetes cluster. But that was kind of the problem with some of this, is I have to go through extra steps to use it as a real Kubernetes cluster. And that's something I don't really want to do. So this is why K3s really isn't the local cluster for me. And really, it's not really designed to, just because it doesn't run in a VM or anything and messes with your base OS, and that's never really good. So, all right, that's it for me for today. I hope you have a fantastic Monday, and I look forward to seeing you guys later. If you like this video, please give it a thumb up. Please comment and let me know what you'd like to see more of. If you didn't like this video for any reason, go ahead and subscribe and stick around and see if these videos get any better for science. Have a fantastic Monday.